Simon, and welcome to my crib. Oh, I'm dizzy. Before we get into our discussion, just kind of want to tell you some things. So there's this guy named Charles Darwin. You probably have heard of him. He's kind of the father of evolution, the father of natural selection, and all of that. And so he was a scientist who went on a voyage across the world, and he stopped at all these different islands and all these different spots and studied organisms there. And then as he did all of his studies and saw the things that he saw, he was able to then write this book called The Origin of Species. And then The Origin of Species, he outlines this plan that says that we see differences in organisms in different places, and that is due to this thing called survival of the fittest. So before we even get into the content material, I kind of want to know what's something about evolution that you believe to be true. So something about evolution or natural selection, monkeys, DNA, Charles Darwin, religion and the church, survival of the fittest, even coronavirus. You can talk about any of those things. I just want to know, what do you already know about evolution? So I'll go ahead and look at what everyone says, and I'll put together a little presentation of your responses, and we'll kind of like talk about them and see who was right or who maybe wasn't fully correct. Okay, so today we are talking about the evidence of evolution. So our objective is that students should be able to define common ancestry and describe how the fossil record, biogeography, and homologies can provide evidence of common ancestry among organisms. So by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to know what common ancestry is. So in the 8th grade, you guys learned about Pangea. So you guys should know what Pangea is. You know how all the continents used to fit together. Continental drift, and of course, fossils. You guys talked about fossil data and whatnot. Okay, so we're actually going to build on some of those topics this year. Okay, so what exactly is evolution? Well, evolution is a theory that helps us answer a lot of questions that we have about the world. Right? Evolution is a theory. Okay, so does evolution mean that we as humans came from monkeys? Well, no, not at all. Okay, so humans, monkeys, and some other organisms like apes and chimpanzees and whatnot have very similar DNA, and of course, DNA gives you your traits. So that just means that we shared a recent common ancestor. Actually, between humans and bananas, I think there's something like 65% of our DNA is shared with the banana. Okay, so evolution, just because we share a lot of DNA with something, doesn't mean that we came from them. It means that at some point we had a common ancestor with that organism. Okay, so we're gonna kind of talk about that. So does evolution explain the origin of life? Can evolution explain the origin of life? No, not at all. Evolution does not even attempt to explain how life began. Okay, life began however it began. Okay, whatever you believe, whatever you believe. Hey, evolution only explains the gradual changes in organisms over time as they adapt to these ever-changing environments. So evolution just talks about, so life began however it began. Evolution just kind of explains like relationships between organisms, explains how they were adapting and growing. Okay? So what is common ancestry? Well, common ancestry explains relationships between organisms and structures over time, right? So having something in common means that both of these organisms or both of these structures or something about them is the same. They have it in common, okay? One thing to note, this means over time. And when I say time, I don't mean 2 hours. I don't mean 2 weeks. I don't mean 2 years. I don't mean even 200 years. I'm talking about thousands and thousands of years, okay? Thousands and thousands, if not millions of years, okay? So common ancestry. So humans and monkeys share a common ancestor. That common ancestor no longer exists, right? But we do have a common ancestor, okay? So there's this video, What is Evolution? I'm not going to play it, but it's pretty good, and you guys should definitely try and watch it. Actually, I might let it play. I'm going to let it play.
Hey friends, have you ever wondered why everything around you looks like the way it is? I mean,
Okay, I lied. I'm not gonna play the whole video, but like I said, it's gonna be on the teacher notes, so I recommend watching it. Okay, same thing with this one right here. I'm not gonna watch this right now, but it's a pretty cool video. Like, it's human evolution speeding up or slowing down. Okay, let's keep it moving. Okay, probably gonna be a long video, so I'm gonna keep it moving. So, how did scientists first realize that evolution was even occurring? Okay, how did they even realize evolution was occurring? Well, so we've kind of talked about what exactly evolution is, right? So it's going to be that common ancestry, that development of organisms, those changes that are seen over long periods of time. So you and I, we're going to work together. We're going to come up with our own theory of evolution. So we're going to be the scientists. Okay, we're gonna look at some pictures of different organisms around the world and come up with our own theory of evolution. Okay. All right. So let's look at these pictures right here. So this right here is the arm bone of a human. So your arm has all those different bones in it, into your hand and your fingers. Okay. This is the arm bone of a horse, of a cat, of a bat, of a bird, and of a whale. Okay. So you can notice right here. Notice that all of those top bones, the humerus, is all in brown, okay? And then we have the radius and ulna in like a tannish and a white, as you can see. And then the finger bones, the phalanges, are going to be in that pale yellowish color, okay? So notice something. These organisms are all very different from each other, but they have very similar traits. So humans use our arms to grab things, right? Cats use their arms to walk. Birds use their arms to fly, and whales use their arms to swim. Okay, this is evidence of common ancestry. And how do we know that? Okay, even though all of these organisms have different lifestyles, they all have a similar anatomy. We all have that exact same bone structure here. This is evidence of common ancestry. So, a common ancestor between all of these organisms at one point found it very beneficial to have bones that are shaped that way. Then that trait kept getting passed down and down and down. And it is true, it's been modified a little bit, right? Because the whale arm looks a little bit different than you and I, but they're still very, very similar to each other. Okay, let's look right here. So this is a dolphin, okay, and it has these little bones in it. This is a pelvic bone, okay? Pelvic bones are used, like your pelvis is used for you to walk, right? That's your pelvic bone. Do dolphins walk? No, they don't. They no longer use that. They no longer use that. You and I, as well, we have this little bone right here. This is called the tailbone, okay? They're in monkeys and whatnot, they have multiples of these structures all in a chain, right? And that's what makes their tail. We have remnants of that. So why might an organism have structures they no longer use? Well, these structures were once useful to their ancestors. Okay? Let's look right here at this. What are these? What is this? Okay? There are bones. Why are there bones and fossil evidence of these creatures that no longer exist, right? We never see these. I've never have walked outside and saw a giant dinosaur thing like that. What happened to them? Why are there bones of them? Why are there fossils of them? Because fossils actually show us what organisms used to look like on Earth, okay? However, these organisms went extinct. This is evidence of common ancestry. So there were common ancestors that used to exist here on Earth. There were millions and millions of them. Some of them left fossils, but a lot of them did not, okay? But the fossils that we do see, we know are common ancestors of organisms that are here on Earth. Okay, let's go right here. So this is showing the DNA of an orangutan, of a gorilla, of a chimp, and of a human, okay? And so these lines are just showing where the genes line up. So between orangutans, gorillas, chimps, and humans, all of this right here is pretty much the same. It's fully conserved. Between the orangutan and the gorilla, there's a little bit of a difference, but just barely, okay? And between chimps and humans, there's barely any difference. It's just a little bit off, okay? So look at that. It's really, really cool. Why is the sequence of DNA very similar in some groups of organisms? So, for example, chimpanzees and humans have very, very similar DNA, but a little bit different than others. Between gorilla and human is a little bit different. Well, some organisms are going to share a more recent common ancestor. This means that they have more similar DNA and thus more similar characteristics. This is evidence of common ancestry. So, I'll go back. So, all of these organisms have very similar DNA, which means that at one point in time, they all had a common ancestor. But we would say that probably the chimp and the human are probably going to be more recent ancestors than the human and the orangutan, right? Because they're more similar. Okay, so the more similar of DNA, we would say is probably going to have a more recent common ancestor. Let's look right here at these. Okay, do you know what this is? These are what are called embryos. They're embryos. So in the womb, as after fertilization, as the organism is developing into a baby, this is what they look like over time. And then they eventually develop into organisms that we can recognize, right? Like this is probably a turtle, this is probably a chicken, and this is probably a pig or maybe a dog. Why do the embryos of animals look very similar at early stages, even though at the end they look very different? Well, development is determined by DNA, okay? Embryonic development is determined by DNA. So organisms that have more similar DNA are going to have more similar embryonic development, okay? This is evidence of common ancestry. Okay, so now that we looked at just like some of the different evidence pieces, and we kind of come up with our own definition of evolution. There's evolution that can be seen in so many things, right? In the different structures of the organism, in the way that the embryos are, in the DNA sequences, right? Like all of this is all shown that there's common ancestry. Okay, so evolution to evolve is going to be a gradual change in a species, and this happens over long periods of time. Now, what did I say a long period of time was? Exactly. It's going to be, we're looking at thousands, if not millions of years. Exactly. So this happens over very, very, very long periods of time. Okay. So this is a picture of kind of what I've been talking about with the whole common ancestor. So let's say these are three birds that are found on an island, right? These three birds are very similar, but they have a little bit of a difference. So this beak is designed for insect eatings, for eating insects, while this bird's beak is designed for pecking into wood and getting insects from the wood. And this one right here, their beak is a little bit more curved. That's better for eating seeds, right? However, all of these organisms shared a common ancestor. That ancestor bird had a beak that was kind of in between all of these, right? And natural selection caused beaks in this part of the island to eat insects, beaks in another part of the island to want to get food out of the wood, and another part of the island eating seeds. Okay, so that's just evolution, is gradual changes in a species that happens over millions and millions of years. So how exactly do we know evolution happens? Well, we just kind of came up with the theory of evolution, right? We talked about the anatomical similarities, so the similarities in their actual anatomy, their structure, the structure of their bodies, right? We looked at the genetics, right? We looked at the differences between chimp DNA, apes, and monkeys and humans, right? We also looked at the embryo, so what they look like when they're developing in the womb. We talked about fossils, so we know that when we see fossils outside, like those organisms no longer exist, but they are common ancestors of organisms that exist today. Okay? And then we're going to look at biogeography and adaptations. Okay, we're going to look at those two a little bit later. But those are just some of the things that scientists, when they first were coming up with the theory of evolution, were looking at all of this evidence and seeing, wow, things have been evolving this entire time. Okay, this is what is called evidence of evolution. So these are evidence. This is things that we look at and we're like, wow, this shows that evolution is occurring. Okay, so it's evidence of evolution. So let's look at it a little bit closer. So, like I said, we're going to talk about anatomical structures. So, anatomy. Anatomy is going to be the physical structures, the way that something looks. So, we just talked about body systems right before this, right? So, the anatomy of the body is just like the different structures that are seen. So, there are three different types of anatomical structures when we're talking about evidence of evolution. This word homologous, this word analogous, and this word vestigial. Let's break down those words. Okay, so a homologous structure is going to be a similar structure. Okay, this similar structures are going to be due to common ancestry origin. So, for example, we looked at those arm bones, right, of the whale, of the bat, of the human, of the horse, of the cat, right? We looked at all those bones. They have very similar structures, and those similar structures are due to common ancestry origins. Okay, while that analogous structure, something that is an analogy to each other, they have very similar functions, but that doesn't mean that they share a common ancestry. So that's going to be like, for example, bats have wings and butterflies have wings. Do they have the same structures of those wings? No, but we know that they're both wings. They're both used for flight, but they're not the same bone structures. So that's going to be a similar function, which means that they do not share a common ancestry origin. Okay, let's look at some examples. I know it's a little bit confusing if I just say the words. Let's look at some examples. So, looking at the human arm, the mouse forelimb, and then the bat wing. Notice again, we have that humerus bone, then we have the radius and ulna, and then we have the fingers, aka the phalanges. Okay, they all have the same general structure, right? Bone 1, bone 2, bone 3, bone 1, bone 2, bone 3, bone 1, bone 2, bone 3, right? They have the same structure. Okay, that is going to be homologous. Okay, this is evidence of a common ancestor. Okay, now let's look at something different. So down here we have a bird's wing, we have a butterfly's wing, and a bat's wing. These do not have same structures, right? There's not like a bone 1, bone 2, bone 3. No, these are totally different structures. Okay, they're totally different structures, but they have the same function, right? A bird uses its wing to fly, a butterfly uses its wing to fly, and a bat uses its wing to fly. That is going to be analogous. Got ahead of myself. So the same shape and number of bones is homologous, while something that is used for the same function is going to be analogous. Okay, so make sure that you know the difference between those two. Look at those flashcards I put on Google Classroom. Okay. So again, if it's a homologous structure, that's evidence of evolution. We're going to assume that they have a common ancestor. However, analogous structures, we would not assume that they have a common ancestor. Okay. So again, this is what it looks like. Homologous structures, same bones, are going to have similar evolutionary origins. While analogous structures are going to have the same functions, but different evolutionary origins. Okay, read this question. Would it be correct to assume that because they both lay eggs, these organisms share a common ancestor? No, we just talked about that. Shared function does not mean a shared ancestor. Okay, another type of structure that you kind of need to know, you definitely need to know, is going to be a vestigial structure. So that's going to be a structure that serves no purpose in an organism. Okay, so an example of humans, right? We have a tailbone. Do we have tails? No. Our common ancestor did, but we don't. Okay. And another example of this is this thing called a cave fish. So obviously, it's a cave fish, so I would assume that it lives in a cave, and in caves it is dark, so the fish is blind, but it still has little eyeballs. Okay, that's because its common ancestor used to see and have eyes and whatnot. But the cave fish has evolved. It's been in its specific environment. It's evolved over time. It no longer needs eyes because it's in a cave. So having eyes in a cave doesn't make sense because it's dark all the time. So they have other ways of moving around. Okay, so again, humans have a tailbone but no tail. Oh. Humans have a tailbone but no tail. Why is that? Well, because we had a common ancestor that had a tail that it used. But our genes evolved very slowly over thousands and thousands of years. Therefore, the tailbone we expect should eventually disappear from the human population. And make myself big real quick. And that is seen. So sometimes babies are actually born with multiple tailbones. Okay, they're born with multiple of them, and they have to get surgery to get it removed. Otherwise, they'll have like a kind of half tail thing. It's and it's not normal in humans. So it's already been seen that like we're having like variances in the population. So eventually the tailbone should completely disappear from the population. Genetics. This is kind of a common sense thing. So obviously, if this type of organism and that type of organism have very similar DNA, then we're going to say that they're closely related, right? That makes sense. So whether you see that as in a written out in a paragraph, oh, so and so are more closely related, or you see it in a chart, in a table, in which you see the differences between the DNA of different organisms, you just look for whoever has the most similar DNA. They're going to be the most closely related. Okay. Embryology, of course, we already talked about this, hitting it once again. So early development. Okay, Jesus. Sorry, that heater started going off. Early development of different species are going to look similar. This is due to common ancestry origin, right? Because like we said, DNA is going to be the main factor of embryology. So if you have very similar DNA, you have very similar embryos, which tells us that you have a common ancestor. Okay, so look at these embryos. Can you tell me which of these is the fish? Which is the human? Which is the turtle, the salamander, or the pig? Kind of hard, right? It's kind of hard. Here's the answers. So fish, salamander, tortoise, chick, pig, calf, so a cow, rabbit, human, right? But I mean, if you just look at that early development, or even the second early development, it's still very hard to tell who is who, right? Because the DNA is so similar. The DNA is so similar because of that common ancestor that it's very hard to tell them apart. Okay, and that's evidence of evolution. All these organisms look different when they are born, but as embryos, they start to form the same way. This tells us that these organisms share part of their DNA due to common ancestry. Exactly. Okay, fossils. So any trace that is left by a previous organism can be used to trace organisms back to their common ancestors. Okay, so we are Homo sapiens, but we have an ancestor that is called Homo erectus. Okay, and then there is a pre-erectus Homo that is found even older. Okay, so we have found skulls of our common ancestors that look like us a little bit, but has some very different features. They still look kind of like more like monkeys than we do. Okay, so by looking at those fossils, this is proof that we have a common ancestor that is extinct. Okay, a common ancestor that's not quite human, not quite monkey. Right, we have a common ancestor, and we only know that because of fossils, right? Because none of us were alive millions of years ago to see this, but there's fossil records. So fossils are very, very key for that. Okay, there's this thing called biogeography. So you guys all know what geography class is, right? Look, geography is like where things are on a map, where things are on the globe. And then we know that bio means what? What does bio mean? Bio means life. So we're talking about life, how life is distributed on a map. Okay? And something that is just kind of common sense is that organisms are going to be best suited for certain conditions of a certain environment. So for example, a fish is best suited for the conditions of the ocean. A fish is not suited for a desert. Right? Humans, we are best suited for certain conditions on Earth. Would we survive in the moon environment? No, we have to have special equipment and all that, okay? You have certain environmental requirements. So again, biogeography is going to be life on a map. So distribution of animal life by geographic region. Okay? Sometimes there are geographic barriers that are going to limit or prevent gene flow. So sometimes there are barriers like mountains that stop organisms from migrating from place to place. So since these things are stuck where they are, okay, they have to stick to that environment, they're going to evolve as the environment changes. Right? They're going to adapt to their environment. They're going to change to survive better. Okay? So again, biogeography. So certain things are adapted for certain environments. So if we look at a map and we see, okay, bones of this organism are found in this region of South America and also in this part of Africa. Then we know, okay, so these must be connected, right? Because this organism right here cannot swim across oceans, right? So we know that, okay, at some point in time, South America and Africa fit together like that. Okay, and then if you look at evidence from other organisms where their fossils are found, right, you see the same thing where it all fits together like a puzzle. And that's where Pangea comes into it. So by seeing where an animal's bones or fossils are found, we can assume that continents had to fit together to make that fossil location make sense, right? Like I said, these animals cannot swim across oceans. They can't. So if their fossils are found here and here, then those continents had to have been stuck together at some point in time for that to happen. Okay. And again, we see evidence of Pangea in so many places, So again, you can see evidence of it here based off the ratite distribution. Right, so we know that at one point, all of those continents had to fit together to it so that the ratite could move about. So let's just recap today's lesson. So, question: why are all mammals' forelimbs homologous? Okay, their forelimbs are homologous because they descended from a common ancestor that had forelimbs. Okay. Also notice the question asks about mammals, and of course, a frog and whatnot is not a mammal, but okay. Can organisms consciously direct their own evolution? So if I thought really hard, I want to evolve. Can I evolve? No, natural selection is by chance due to environmental challenges. Individuals cannot wish to evolve. It happens naturally over millions and millions of years. And we're actually going to talk about in the next lesson the mechanisms of evolution. So today we're just talking about evidence, how we know evolution happens. And then next lesson, we're going to actually talk about the ways in which it does happen. Okay? Okay, and this is a question one of my students in fifth period asked me, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Okay, so there had to have been some sort of common ancestor of the chicken that laid an egg. That egg hatched and had features that were different from the common ancestor. Then that new organism that just hatched is a chicken, right? That's what we named it. So that's what had to have happened. Um, yeah. So let me make myself big. So pretty much now you guys need to get onto that exit ticket and look at that vocabulary that I've posted. Starting a new unit, so be on the lookout for all the new resources that are going to be posted up, and continue being the awesome students. Oh, that scared me. That you are.